Hi everyone, I am coming to you live from downtown Denver, and today there is definitely construction going on outside my window. So I can hear the noise. I'm hoping it's not going to be too distracting for any of you, and I'm just getting this video shared on my own page as I usually do at the very beginning here, so bear with me one moment. Okay, this is now going out to my page as well. And please speak up if the noise, the construction noise, or any of the noise in the background gets too overwhelming, and I can actually pause the video and go to a different room and resume where hopefully it would be slightly less distracting. So please just you probably just make a comment as I'm speaking if that seems to be the case. Thank you very much for joining me today. It always makes my day to see folks show up for these, and I really do enjoy doing them either way, but having a little bit of an audience always makes it that much more fun. I want to remind everyone about, I should have put this closer, Jenny's book that I am giving away. Again, I know this is backwards for you, but it's a book called Hearts that a good friend of mine, I interviewed her a few weeks ago, Jenny Lynn, that she wrote, and I am giving away 2 copies to anyone who shares any of the videos I filmed on Facebook in October, but also I'm extending that to the first 2 weeks of November. So you can share this one and any of the upcoming 2 videos for the next couple weeks, and you will automatically be put into the drawing for her awesome book. And it's a bunch of pictures she's taken of sort of hidden hearts in nature, and then a little quote or her own thoughts, her own words next to it. And they're really neat because a lot of them are not overly obvious, so it's kind of fun to check them out and see what you make out of the pictures as well as her own thoughts on it. So please just go ahead and share these videos with anyone you think might get some value out of them, and as my thank you for doing that, 2 of you will get actually personally autographed copies of her book where she'll write a little inscription just for you. For those of you who don't know me, I was in a corporate wellness and behavior change company for about 20 years, and I have experience being an executive manager. I was a CIO for that and a CEO of ENSOMA. I am a public speaker now as well as a geek coach because I myself identify as being a geek. So I help people who are in analytical mindsets, who have perhaps careers in the software industry or other related types of engineering jobs, learn the skills to both advocate for themselves, develop their own careers, and one of my passions is not seeing great engineers be turned into bad or mediocre managers, and I work with people, companies, and individuals to help try to make sure that that's not the path that people follow in their engineering and analytical careers. If you're watching this Facebook Live video, hopefully you are interested in small, actionable, and intelligent ways to make changes for a more well-balanced and happy life, both for yourself and perhaps for others. The next couple weeks, brief change in the schedule here. Still going to have this Facebook Live video happening at the same time. I'm going to be away and unavailable during those times, so I'm excited to tell you that Erin Sell of the company Socially Powered, and I will put a link to her company in the comments after I'm done filming this. She is going to be hosting next week's Facebook Live video, and she'll have some great stuff for you around social media, and if you're in the Denver area, some events coming up, and hopefully some neat tidbits on how you can kind of spice up your social media presence as well. So that'll be great. It'll be something a little bit different, but she is brilliant at this sort of thing, and it's worth tuning in for. Then the following week, we're going to have another guest Facebook Live broadcaster. Is that what you'd call these? hostess? And Erin will be mentioning next week who that will be. So a couple twists coming up, a couple of different hosts or hostesses, and hopefully you'll enjoy that. And then I will be back on to the regular time on November 16th. And that will be, all the videos will be at the usual Thursday 1 p.m. Mountain Time, but just with 2 different hosts in the next couple weeks. Okay, so on to some good juicy topics. Last week I talked about ego states, specifically parent, adult, and child. And these were really metaphors of ways of thinking and behaving. So if you'll recall, it's not that it was saying that you or someone you know is childish or is acting like a parental figure. It's that all of us can embody these different states at different times and during different types of transactions and social interactions. So the parent and child states each had split sides to them. The parent could be controlling, the parent can be nurturing. Neither one of these is a commentary on whether that's good or bad. For example, a controlling parent could be seen as fault-finding and dismissive behavior. But a nurturing parent state could be seen as constructive criticizing, constructive criticism, organizing, firm. Sometimes structure is needed in situations. So that is a parent that can be controlling, and that can be both positive or negative depending on what the circumstances call for. A nurturing type of parent ego state, same thing. Nurturing could become smothering, overprotective. I think we all probably have known someone like that who, especially as you become an adult, you kind of get that feeling of, hey, you're not the boss of me. I'm not a 12-year-old. You don't need to be checking in on me every 5 minutes. So that can feel very oppressive, a nurturing, smothering parent state. However, a nurturing parent state can also be supportive and compassionate and caring, and can try to anticipate what needs the person in the interaction that they're in the relationship with might have. And that can be a positive feeling, especially if that person is sort of in a childlike state where they need some of that nurturing. All of these things, as I'll talk further about, have degrees too. So I may be giving examples of any of these and overstating it just to make a point, but I realize that oftentimes it's not quite as clear-cut, and there's lots of areas of variation in between the ends of the spectrum. We talked a little bit about the child state. There's 2 sides to the child state, adaptive and free. So an adaptive child state could look something like very compliant, fearful, helpless, a little bit victim-y. It could even look rebellious because, and I know that sounds a bit contradictory, but a child state could just be sort of like, no, I'm not going to do this. I don't have to. So think of a little bit of a tantrum. The other side of an adapted child state could be very accommodating and cooperative, and sure, you know better. I'll just follow your lead. You're the adult here. So those are both childlike ego states, and it can be adaptive childlike ego states. I know this gets a little bit complicated, and I'm almost thinking I should do a chart or something. And then finally, the free child state is sort of the, I don't care what my actions do to anyone else. I want to run around and play, and it's very egocentric. I'm going to do what's best for me with no regard to how it might impact the world around me or other people's lives. It's very inconsiderate, but it can feel playful. That being said, there can also be sort of a creative, curious joyousness to this that can be in the free child state very enjoyable and appropriate in the right circumstances to the right degree. So to reiterate very quickly, parent and child can both have two sides to the equation: controlling and nurturing for a parent, adapted and free for a child. There's degrees of all of these states, and from weak to strong. The scope is vast. We're humans. We're complicated creatures. This is a good thing, because I'm about to talk about social games that we can often stumble into or be playing ourselves and not even realizing it, even be initiating ourselves and not realizing it. So the fact that we are complicated and there's lots of ways to address different situations is great news, because when you're in these games, you may need all sorts of different skill sets to identify them and step out of them or turn them in a direction that's more healthy. If you will recall from last week, the third state, the third ego state, is called adult. And that is not split. And that's actually usually, if you're working on strengthening somebody's ego states and strengthening their social and emotional intelligence, you really are trying to focus on the adult state and get them to strengthen that state and that way of being. So as we talk through some of these games, keep in mind that once I get to the point where I'm talking about the ways to step out of these games or not get in them, that we're often going to be going back to moving into the adult state in order to accomplish that. Okay, one quick last thing to review from last week was I talked about transaction types, and I talked about complementary transactions. So if you have a parent and a child ego state in two different people going on, that's a complementary transaction, because you can keep that transaction going and going and going, because the parent state feeds the child's needs and vice versa, the child state's need. I think I used the example of a snake and being afraid of a snake, and if I act childlike and Robin was acting parent-like, then we can maintain that relationship pretty easily for an extended period of time. However, the inverse of that is a crossed ego state transaction. So if you have two people who both are in the parent state and they're trying to parent each other, that will very quickly create tension and a feeling of not needing to resolve something, whether that's separating from the other person, getting in an argument, or somebody has to change states. So that's called a cross transaction. Today, I'm going to introduce a third type. I keep bumping my mic, so hopefully that's not too obnoxious. Today's type is a split transaction. So this term, what does this mean? Well, a split transaction is when on the surface it may seem like an adult conversation, like an adult transaction. But what's really going on underneath with the ego states and the need for people to get needs met, I'll touch on that a little bit, is really what's called a split there may be really parent-child going on underneath, or some other form of child-child, or some other form of transaction. So here's an example. That's just the idea of a split transaction, is that there's something going on the surface and something different going on underneath. I want to ask for a raise, let's say, and I want to go to my boss, and I'm a little nervous about this. I don't know how to walk in and broach the subject. So I go to my coworker, Mark, and I say, hey, Mark, can you help me out with this? I'm trying to figure out the best way to approach Jenny. I'm going to say Jenny Salimi is my boss today. Hi, Jenny, and hi, Eleni. Nice to see you both. So I'm going to go to my boss, Jenny, and ask for a raise. But I want Mark's help to prepare for this. So I go to Mark and I say, I have a few different ideas of how I'm going to approach Jenny. Can I run them by you? And he says, sure, let me help you with this. I'm happy to. Everything seems very adult on the surface. And I say, well, here's my first idea. I was thinking of taking Jenny out for coffee to talk to her. And Mark will say, yeah, but Jenny doesn't really like coffee, so that's probably not the best way. Okay, well, I was thinking, so maybe I say, well, Mark, what do you think? Or let me flip the situation. Hold on for a moment there. Yeah, so Mark says, I'm rewind, scratch that. Mark's the one who says, well, why don't you take Jenny out for coffee and talk to her there? And then I say, well, thanks for that suggestion, but Jenny doesn't really like coffee. So I'm just flipping our roles for a second, me and Mark. So then Mark says, okay, well, how about Jenny's really busy, so how about you schedule time and make it clear what you want to talk to her about so that she can be prepared. And I say, well, yeah, but I really don't want her thinking about this ahead of time, and that will make me more nervous. And so then Mark says, okay, well, how about you invite Jenny for drinks after work, and then it'll be a more relaxed atmosphere and you can test the waters. And I'd say, yeah, but that doesn't feel very professional to me, and I just don't know if it'll be too loud. And I come up with a reason I've asked for Mark's help, and he's making reasonable suggestions, but every single time I come up with an objection. Yes, but yeah, but it has that feeling to it. What's really going on here is, although on the surface it seems like an adult conversation, and Mark is, I have a reasonable question, I've asked for his help, he's offering reasonable solutions, what's really going on is there's a parent-child transaction going on underneath. So first of all, Mark presumes that he can solve my problem. And right there, he has engaged in the parent ego state. He said, oh, yeah, I can come up with a solution to this that you haven't thought of yet. And that's a reasonable assumption since I've asked for his help. However, I'm reacting to all of those by sort of being a bit of a helpless child and not really offering or contributing to that conversation. And that's where it gets confusing. So this is a social game that in the transactional analysis framework is called Why Don't You Yes But? And that's the name of the game. Why don't you yes but? So it looks like two adults having a reasonable discussion, solving a problem, when really there's a parent-child going on. Then Mark has offered 3 or 4 different suggestions of how I might approach Jenny to ask for a raise. And finally, I will turn around and go, you're just no help to me. None of this is working. Just forget it. I'll figure something out. And it comes across as just sort of like dismissive and annoyed. And then Mark is sitting there thinking, well, geez, I was just trying to help her, and she asked for my help, and why do now I feel incompetent? I'm a smart guy. I feel devalued. Why couldn't I help her with this? Why was none of this good enough? So that's called the switch. Whereas now I've switched into the parent state and said, oh, you're useless. And Mark has switched into the child state, feeling a bit helpless. Like, okay, well, I tried my best. And then the final stage of a social game is called the payoff. So we had the responses. And in this game, again, why don't you yes but? Here's an idea, yeah, but that's not going to work. Here's another idea, that's not going to work. Those are the responses. And then comes the switch, where I get tired of this game, it's met my needs, and I go, forget it. That's called the cross, the switch. And then the payoff, and Mark then feels devalued, and then the payoff for me, where my needs being met, is I get to feel superior. Never mind, this problem is too difficult for you. I'll solve it myself. So it's very complicated, because what I really wanted from Mark in that conversation was justification and attention. I didn't actually truly really want him to help me solve my problem. But on the surface, I approached getting my needs met as if I was asking him for help with an actual tangible problem. That's a very, very different feeling my payoff in the end is that I get to feel superior. I get to feel like, oh, I've tried. This is really complicated, and even Mark couldn't help me solve it. There's sort of an ego boost in that moment, and it's typically kind of a negative feeling for the person on the other side of the game. Well, what did Mark get out of it? He went into it with this assumption that he could help me with that he had, his need was to feel helpful, perhaps. That's a very valid need that many of us have going into these conversations. I need to feel needed, wanted, useful, helpful. So Mark went into this getting that need met on his behalf. So after this game is over, we've both had our needs met, and yet there's a feeling of not really feeling great about things, and B, probably being no closer to a real solution of the actual issue of the conversation. A little bit complicated, I recognize that. The thing that is interesting to me about these social games is everyone in the experience has to buy into the game for it to continue. So the con is and I'm going to be using the psychology terms here, is the transactional analysis term. When I come into this game and I draw Mark in, my con is that I have this problem that I would like your help with. And it's called a con because that's not really what my actual deeper need is that's going to come out in this conversation. The gimmick is Mark's need. He has some gimmick, and again, these are words, they're kind of funky, but these are the psychology terms around this theory. Mark's gimmick is probably to feel helpful, to feel superior, to feel smart, to feel needed. So something about my con, my game that I'm putting out there is appealing to Mark, and he has to engage in it with me in order for this game to happen. Why do we play these types of games? Why can't we just really, what's going on here? What are the drivers behind having these split transactions where what's going on the surface is not really underneath? Well, super complicated topic. I'll get more deeply into this in a future video. But to scratch the surface, mutual needs are being met, needs that you may not even be able to consciously articulate that you have. Attention, our need for attention is so deeply ingrained in ourselves and in society that even negative attention and drama is better than being shunned, is better than being ignored. And the third one that is typically a driver is reaffirming our life position. So that's life position is some sort of story we've told ourselves about, in a broader sense, our self-worth and how we interact with the world. So I'm okay, you're okay. I can go around from day to day kind of believing that about my general populace. Yeah, there might be specific events that still are a bit off, but in general, it's sort of an optimistic, I'm okay, you're okay. So I'll tend to engage in games that reaffirm that life position. I'm not okay, but you're okay. I'm just not very worth it. I'm kind of, everything I do, I just screw up. That's another life position that I might find games to reaffirm what I already believe about myself. I'm okay, you're not okay. Another one, that I just, hey, I'm great, but I don't know what's wrong with the rest of humanity. I really think I should be running the show here. Everybody should follow my lead. And then finally, the last combination of these life positions is I'm not okay, you're not okay. It's kind of depressive. So we will often be drawn into games that reaffirm our already existing life position beliefs. I realize I'm running a bit long today, so there's so much more I want to talk about. I want to talk about dealing with games, how to recognize them early, how not to engage in them, how to withdraw. There are multiple different techniques. There are many different kinds of social games that can start happening before you're even aware. You can have played an entire game with somebody before you're even aware a game was happening. So very quick wrap up on that, because this is a topic I am absolutely planning on going into when I return from my 2-week hiatus. First is an awareness that these games exist, and they can happen quickly and they can happen subconsciously. So even if you realize after the fact that you were involved in some sort of a split transaction game, you can still benefit from that by saying, okay, what were my needs? How did I end up in that? And what needs did I get met by having that type of interaction with someone? So don't beat yourself up if you realize you sort of got taken for a little bit of an emotional ride. And it's really not in your best interest, generally speaking, to try to figure out the other person's motivations and needs and so on. But if you can look at yourself and say, well, what happened there with me? Why did that get me so angry? What triggered me? Why did I continue trying to help this person or continue going down this path when clearly it was futile? So if you can kind of have that conversation with yourself afterwards, that can in the future reinforce getting out of these games or not getting drawn into them. And games typically have a little bit of a slippery feel to them too. Something just happened here and it didn't quite feel right and I'm not totally sure why. So look out for that feeling, that sort of icky, slippery feeling, and there's a chance you were involved in a game. Finally, they can often involve what's called discount statements. Again, the psychological term for it. Saying to somebody, your work is rubbish, your work is terrible. That's a discount. That's just your opinion. There's no facts to back it up. There's no context. Whereas if you say to somebody, the way you did this work in this particular situation isn't meeting the needs, that is not a discount. That is a valid viewpoint and can open the discussion to further understanding. So oftentimes when you're involved in a game, there'll be these discount rubbish statements, if you will. That's it for today. This is super complex, and I look forward to talking about some more behavioral gamey transactions that you might find, the patterns around them, and how to recognize and disengage from them, as well as potentially call the other person out on what they're doing, which is always fun. So thank you again for joining. Please, if you share this video, any of the October ones, and the next two coming up in November, up until November 15th, you will be entered into a drawing for a personally autographed copy of Jenny's awesome book, Hearts. And I mentioned earlier I'm doing geek coaching and public speaking, so I will put a link in the comments if you want to schedule some time with me to hear more about that or share any of your own thoughts about social topics or anything else that might be on your mind. And next week, I welcome Erin Sell of Socially Powered, who will be hosting this Facebook Live slot for me, and she'll be lining up a surprise guest for the following Thursday, November 9th. I'll be back my regular time, November 16th, and please try to make someone else's day a little better. You already have made mine better just by showing up and watching this, and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye, until next time.